Okay. Now I'm going to start the session now because everyone should be on. Anyone that's coming late, they're welcome to. So good afternoon, everyone on this call. And thank you for joining us today for Landcare Agriculture's webinar, Biodiversity, Maximising Ecosystem Opportunities to Fit Your Business. My name is Angela Hammond, and I'm the manager of the Landcare Ag program, and I'll be your facilitator for today's session. And I've got Tatiana and Ellie in the background and Kelly Penfold, who will be supporting me as well. This is an exciting time in our ag industry as we step into a new era where land stewardship, sustainability and biodiversity are increasingly understood in the ag context and leveraged to strengthen landscape health and create business opportunities. I'll be guiding you through today's session where we'll explore the opportunities and the complexities of biodiversity management in ag. Our aim is to provide you with some practical insights and tools that will help you as land managers understand how biodiversity management has the potential to support both your environmental impact and your business profitability. We're honoured to have an outstanding lineup of speakers joining us today, with each of these experts bringing a wealth of knowledge and first-hand experience that will offer valuable insights into the current landscape of biodiversity in agriculture and how it might integrate into your operations. Following the presentations, we'll open up the floor for a Q&A session, giving you a chance to pose questions directly to the speakers. While the presentations are happening, please put up any questions in the chat function rather than the Q&A. Either or is okay, but chat would work better for us. Just put them up in there so we can prioritise them, and at the end we will ask the questions of the speakers. Any of the questions we don't get to, we will send out the responses in an email after the webinar is finished, along with the recording to the webinar. And please feel free to share this with your network. So just we'll prioritise the questions today, and if we don't get to them, we will email the responses. So without further ado, thank you all for coming. And let's begin. So I don't know if any of you heard our conversation. Our first speaker is a stunted Celt, like myself, not the tall Vikings, which is Amanda and Björn, but Professor Hugh Possingham is our first speaker. Now, Hugh is a nature lover and a bird lover. He is the former Queensland Chief Scientist, currently the Chief Scientist for Accounting for Nature and the Chief Counsellor for the Biodiversity Council. Hugh has research interest in environmental markets and will today share insights into new markets and also the challenges of quantifying biodiversity. So I'll hand over to you, Hugh, and thank you all for attending.
Thanks a lot, Ange, and it's good to see so many people online. It's an exciting time for discussing the whole issue of biodiversity markets and biodiversity in Australia. I'm going to sort of cover some in the first 5 or few minutes, some general background information. I also am going to set the challenge that I'll try and give an entire talk without using an acronym. So if I do, I have to buy everybody a beer or a gin and tonic, whatever your glass of red wine, because a lot of the problems in this space, I think, is caused by jargon, complicated language, acronyms, and the whole biodiversity market thing is probably a little bit simpler than we think, although it's probably very confusing at present, and I suppose that's why we're here today. A couple of things I would like to say at the beginning. People often say, what is this sudden concern about biodiversity? What is biodiversity? Well, you can just say nature if you like. That's it. Is it a sudden concern? No. There were people worried about extinctions going back to the 1920s. The professor of zoology at Adelaide University moved koalas, brush turkeys and gangangs and platypuses on Kangaroo Island to Kangaroo Island, where they were not native, because he thought they were going to go extinct on the mainland. It's 100 years ago. Farmers saw the problems of salinity and land clearing in Western Australia in the 1930s, all the way to the 1970s and 80s, when we started stopping clearing salinised land. And then, obviously, why would we care about nature? Is it just because it's cute and, 10% of the world are actually bird watchers? The US, the bird watching industry is worth $260 billion a year, but nature basically underpins 50% of our economy, and every landowner knows the importance of natural predators and pollinators, and particularly soil health and biodiversity to their economy. And then I think finally the world's realised that there are actually two gigantic existential crises that face us, other than maybe Putin and Trump, if we can rule them out. But the two big existential crises are climate change. And, if we don't get on top of that and we roll through to 4, 5, 6, 7 degrees, nothing's going to be pleasant, particularly in Australia. And that has been a slow-moving issue, and in many ways has been the big environmental issue of the 2000s and 2010s. I'm going to contentiously say that I think we're sort of on top of it now, and I think 90% of Australians are fully aligned that this is an issue. We probably got on top of it too late, and it's hard to manage an issue that is a global issue, which has to involve everybody, like on a global scale, that is so slow moving, where the impact of what you do now doesn't really affect people for 30, 40, or 50 years. Biodiversity loss is harder again because it's more nebulous, it's more vague, and it moves even slower. So we were sort of on track to wipe out 50% of the world's species in the next 200 or 300 years. That does count as a mass extinction. That's more or less coming close to a gigantic meteorite that hit the planet 60 million years ago. But it's a very slow moving thing, and it doesn't typically affect people on a day-to-day basis, or we're starting to see the start of that. So Australia's losing a vertebrate every 3 or 4 years, but it's not as though the stock market is reeling out of control. So that said, most countries now have realised it. We've signed up onto the Convention on Biological Diversity, and we're committed to stopping extinctions. Most states and governments are saying they want to stop extinctions. They want to stop the loss of habitat and many things around nature. But it is a messy thing because the Convention on Biological Diversity sets 23 objectives. So that's quite complicated. Whereas with the climate change stuff, there are a number of objectives, but ultimately everybody really just signed on to this 1.5 degrees C target. And so in some senses, it's simpler to understand what's going on. I'm going to go straight into something very specific just because I think this can be very vague and nebulous to everybody, and talk about a biodiversity market that's existed all around Australia in various forms for a long period of time, and that is the offsetting biodiversity market. Now, we're not going to actually talk much about offsetting now because it's moderately well known, but we have been using biodiversity markets for a long time, and it is through biodiversity offsets. Most biodiversity offsets exist through habitat hectare type metrics. And it's simply put, if I was to say I want to build a hospital and I'm going to destroy 20 hectares of high quality woodland of a particular kind, I would measure the area of that woodland, and then I'd measure some metric of the quality of that woodland, which is something to do with the age of the trees, the wood on the ground, maybe some aspects of biodiversity, how weedy it was. I'd give it a score like 0.8. And I'm destroying 20 hectares, and so 20 times 0.8, I'm hoping that 16 is 16 habitat hectares I've destroyed. And in most states, in various forms, the government now says you have to compensate nature for that because we want no net loss, which is not nature positive. Let me be clear on that. And ideally, you would pay you yourself, or you would pay somebody else to create that amount of nature, which is 20 hectares times 0.8 quality. A lot of the accounting for nature methods follow this sort of rubric, and the state government and the federal government have different sorts of offset calculators. And that can just be done by yourself, or it can be done by the state if you pay them, but it also can be opened up to a market, and probably New South Wales has the most developed offset market where people can create in an advanced sense or at any point in time biodiversity credits of particular habitat types of particular qualities, and they can sell them to the people who need to buy them to compensate nature. So in some senses, we are very fortunate in Australia. We are not behind anybody else in the world. We are probably one of the most advanced nations, or if not the most advanced nation, in using some form of market-based instrument to try and help nature prosper. That said, offsets have been fraught with problems. I sit on one offset committee in South Australia. I used to chair an offset committee in Queensland. I've reviewed the New South Wales and helped the New South Wales government set up their offsets committees. We've seen scandal after scandal. Basically, offsetting is not even delivering no net loss. It's delivering quite substantial losses to nature. While that's going on, really to say that this sort of trading and markets in biodiversity has existed for a long time in Australia and is relatively well advanced. That said, offsetting is not working. On top of this, we now have the desire by governments to actually be more like nature positive. Now, what is nature positive? There is a well-defined international definition. The federal government haven't used that at the moment, but I'll tell you the proper definition. The proper definition of nature positive is that somehow in every aspect of nature, Australia's nature biodiversity would be back in 2030 to what it was in 2020, and by 2050 it'll be fully recovered. We don't quite know what fully recovered means, but we do know more or less where we were in 2020. So, for example, the headline indicator for biodiversity in Australia is the Threatened Species Index, which I co-created about in 2016, and every government department seemed to want to stop me do that. But we end up with a headline indicator for the nation. And at that point in time, by 2020, biodiversity had been in decline, or threatened species had been in decline by 4% every year since 2000. So every year since we created the Environmental Protection and Biodiversity Conservation Act, for 20 years, biodiversity has been in decline 4% a year. So if we're going to be nature positive, in theory, it bottoms out at 2025, that's next year, and starts going up and we recover our 2020 levels for threatened species and vegetation condition and extend across the nature, water quality, soil, all those things by 2030. So that's the sort of the commitment of nature positive. Now, if we were having this conversation 50 years ago, most people would say, well, the government should just go and do it. And that's what governments did. They built railway networks, they built infrastructure, there were many more public servants, and they did a lot of the work that was community good work. Current environmental spending in Australia is about 0.1% of your tax dollar. So if you pay $100 in tax, you'll be glad to know 10 cents went to nature. That's not going very far. And there's no real prospect of that going up, despite the bleating of people like me repeatedly in the media and the Biodiversity Council. So one of the solutions potentially is to use markets. And markets potentially are one of the ways of filling this massive shortfall in the money we need for nature. Philanthropy is another mechanism, which is not unrelated to market-based mechanisms. So we've committed to the Convention on Biological Diversity. Europeans have a task force, or they champion the task force in nature-related financial disclosures. They're more or less forcing most of their companies by 2030, big companies, to write down all their impacts on nature. So actually have a biodiversity account for all their activities, their direct and indirect activities. And they're also asking them to write down all the risks that biodiversity loss poses to their business. So that means a lot of quantification and ultimately potentially access to markets. If those companies can't prove that they're heading towards being nature positive by 2030 or soon after, they may lose access to markets, they may lose access to finances. So that's one of the ways you can create a biodiversity market, is you can basically regulate, more and more regulation. Offsetting is another form of regulation. It's economist would say it's a cap and trade regulation, which is a lot like a lot of our carbon markets. And there are also other things that can be driven from the bottom up, and we've already seen that when Woolworths and maybe soon Coles said they want deforestation-free beef. People might pay more money for dolphin-friendly tuna. We all pay more money if we want free-range eggs. There's going to be a very high likelihood you'll be able to buy certain products that are biodiversity positive or nature positive products, or carbon positive products, just as you can buy, in theory, dolphin-friendly tuna. So access to markets is a big thing. That is a market-based instrument. And then somebody's got to decide who is deforestation free. Is this really dolphin-friendly tuna? Which pastoral properties are biodiversity positive? Which companies? What is green steel? Is it not just carbon neutral? How is this green steel biodiversity positive? For example, they might not want to get all their renewable energy from green steel by destroying native habitat for solar and wind farms, which is another major threat to biodiversity across the nation. And then very recently, under this government, there were many reforms potentially in environmental legislation. The only one that's gone through is the Nature Repair Bill, and that creates a market. And in that market, some of the methods are being developed as we speak. People can get what's called certificates in the Nature Repair Bill when they get certificates for doing actions that are good for biodiversity. And in theory, those certificates can be bought and sold and traded like any other market. Now, I think everybody in the school knows what a market is, and everybody knows there's stable markets, there's in there unstable markets. Part of my superannuation is in Tesla shares, and you don't really want to watch Tesla shares because they jump around erratically. They can go up 10% overnight and they can drop 10% the next day. So unfortunately, with carbon and biodiversity, we're still in the early phases and the market is not that stable. It's not like, oh, gee, I'd like to buy Commonwealth Bank shares or national, BHP shares. It's enormous fluctuation, and a lot of that uncertainty is caused by the fact that these markets are very young. The quantification of the markets are early in the early phases, and it's not even entirely clear yet who wants to buy biodiversity credits or biodiversity certificates. With the offset world, we know, and the Nature Repair Bill explicitly says that biodiversity certificates can't be used for offsetting. So the only market that we know that almost partially just works in Australia, which is the offsetting market, and that will improve as we tighten up the rules and legislation around offsetting. The Nature Repair Bill doesn't allow us to create certificates that play into that. So there is complexity there. That said, already many of you may have already played in these markets and may already, for example, have agreed to do offsetting. And then the deal there is quite simple. I mean, if you are going to set aside some of your land, if you're going to improve the biodiversity, the habitat condition of your land, if you're going to do things for bilbies by killing foxes, who's going to pay you to do that? And can you get enough credits and certificates? And is that worth your while, effectively? Is that worth your while? So let me, without going into too many details, because I think some of the others will speak to these things, introduce some of the complexities. Well, the first complexity is nature's just not that simple to measure. There's 8 million species on the planet, right? I'm not going to count the weevils, and I'm not going to do every single soil bacteria. The thing that we've done in Australia by pegging a lot of our nature markets to habitat condition is good. It's well done. Different states have slightly different methods, but it's stable and reliable. That said, a vegetation condition is far and away not the be-all and end-all of biodiversity at all. I can walk into a forest, a woodland, in perfect condition from a vegetation perspective, and there are virtually no woodland birds of interest in there. There are virtually no woodland birds. So it's a surrogate for biodiversity. So Amanda will talk a bit about accounting for nature metrics. They've got a raft of metrics to try and cover off on the diversity of issues around nature, and we will see those metrics proliferate. So it is a bit complicated. I mean, in a sense, it's easier than carbon dioxide, but it's much more complicated. Carbon dioxide and methane, they're molecules, they can be measured. I can't see them, but they can be measured reliably. That said, you would also know that the carbon markets have also been a little bit flaky in the last few years. And that's partly, again, because a lot of the benefits of doing actions for carbon have been modelled benefits, not actual measured benefits. So I'd say that's the first thing we need to face in these biodiversity markets. How much are we going to pay people for doing things that, in principle, like killing a fox, reducing grazing pressure, in principle are good for biodiversity without actually measuring the impact on biodiversity? So there's action metrics and action-based credits and certificates, and there's outcome certificates and credits. And that's one of the things that everybody should be ultimately wary of. And to that point, if you do take a series of actions that are intended to improve biodiversity, how long do you have to do that for? Which is, the economists call that permanence. So do you sign up, many of these deals, people sign up to 15, 30-year agreements where they agree to reduce grazing or they agree to improve the state of vegetation to a certain point by over a period of time. Is that forever? Well, usually not, because not many people want to commit to many of these things forever. Certainly, sometimes they can. And what happens when you've done all those good things, you've created some improvements in biodiversity, you've sold it to a big company, and then 30 years pass, the next landowner just decides that they're not interested in that biodiversity that you've nurtured for a long period of time, disappears. Leakage is another term that economists have created to make my brain hurt. A leakage is also, if we do good things in one particular place, is that not displacing the unfavourable activities somewhere else? This happens a lot in fisheries and logging, and so if we protect a whole heap of areas from fishing, in general, the fishing boats just go somewhere else and they put a lot more pressure on what's left. Now, with the Great Barrier Reef rezoning, they bought out a lot of the licenses, so they stopped the leakage. In a lot of places, though, if you incentivise good behaviour by certain actors, there's a chance that there is leakage of the damage to other places. And that can be extremely hard to quantify. Probably not such an issue in a lot of land restoration. And I suppose finally, the one that I find most contentious and will be talked about a lot in the next 10 years is if somebody is paid to do some good things on their land for nature, improving habitat quality, improving woodland bird diversity, and they actually paid for those activities, people then worry about what's called additionality. And additionality is merely, again, a complicated economics term that says, maybe that was just going to always happen because that landowner loved woodland birds and they wanted to improve the woodlands and they were going to do it anyway. And we're paying for something that would have otherwise happened. So there are, for example, an extreme version of the additionality is some people would say that we should never pay for habitat restoration in national parks because national parks are set up to preserve and restore nature and they should have done it anyway. And so it's not additional. That said, I know a bit of South Australia in a park that's been a sheep paddock for 50 years and nobody's restored it. And it's potentially high quality native vegetation of a rare ecosystem type. National Parks hasn't done it. So you will get a lot of people talking about additionality, and we don't want to pay for things that would have otherwise happened. I am less concerned about that than others. I just think that even if they were thinking of doing it eventually, that giving them finances and credits that they can sell and trade and be part of a biodiversity market surely is going to make them far more likely to do it and also probably improve the longevity of those issues. So there are a whole heap of complexities around the measurements of biodiversity, and Amanda's going to cover that in a minute. It's not always a simple thing, and it has to be a rigorous process, and we need to think like accountants. I don't know whether any of you want to think like an accountant, but we have to think like accountants. We have to think about details and processes and ledgers and all the details of accounting, so we don't make up things that are not true and not real. The only thing I'd finally say is markets are a good and evil, right? We live in a world driven by markets, and am I a capitalist or a socialist? I prospered from the capitalist system, and I think it has caused society and civilization to advance enormously. Deep down, I'm probably a socialist. But that said, markets, once you create them, the best markets run on their own. They just go. There are some minor constraints on what we do with money, but not a lot. I mean, I can go and buy lots of things with money, and we rely on markets. And I know that the cappuccino I might want to buy or the Mars bar can double in price depending on where I buy it from or where I buy it in bulk. That said, despite all those variabilities and the messiness of markets, they generally work and they're reliable. That said, once they're going, they often end up getting out of control and running very quickly, and the government can't do much about them happening. So they go to scale. If government has to do everything and philanthropy has to do anything by itself, paying the money, they don't go to scale. If you make a market, then in theory, things can spread rapidly and there can be massive transformations. And we've seen that in places like Tanzania, where they opened up the possibility of conservancies for land, for wildlife and game and tourism, and in South Africa for trading and hunting trophies for wildlife, And they created huge markets for wildlife that prospered, and rapidly. You just have to look at South Africa using trophy markets, which are highly contentious, I realise, but they have half of the big game in the planet in Africa because they created a market. Now, is it a good market? Is it good for animal welfare? Is it good from an ethical perspective? There's a whole heap of issues, but I can tell you it spreads really, really quickly. So I think that's what we're all looking to do, is we're looking, because we're in a biodiversity crisis, to create a mechanism that spreads super fast, is fluid and profitable. That said, governments often want to put a lot of checks and balances on things. They want to have a lot of integrity, and they want to have a rules, and that often makes things go a little bit slower than you would hope. So we're in this point of tension between over-regulating and under-regulating, and there are risks with both, to be honest. And my view of all of these things, as I've said to the federal minister, uh, I don't think your legislation and your market bills are perfect, but I'm all for giving them a go, because we've all got to try and see whether it does work, and we will learn from that process, as we have been over the last 20 years, trialling different sorts of market. Thank you very much. Was that what was I meant to say that, Ange? I have no idea. There you go. But I've
Perfect.
spoken.
Thank you, Hugh. Yeah, that was great. So thank you so much, Hugh, for a really thorough and motivating introduction. And thank you, everyone, for your involvement and engagement with the questions on the side. And there's a really nice community thing going on here. We will get back to you guys after this webinar with some of these opportunities. Like Jonathan, yep, we will get some info from you and be able to share with everyone. Hugh, it was great to hear all that. The 4% decline a year and our opportunity to kind of turn that around between now and 2050 is fabulous. And you are right. I mean, we need to actually have some good structures around what we're doing. And it is a balance between getting it right and having, getting the data there, but also not holding that up for too long. And that's the difficulty. And it's what we're all trying to, make smooth the process. So thank you for that. It's my pleasure now to introduce one of my most favourite people in the biodiversity world, which is Dr. Amanda Hansen. Amanda's been doing some great work with the Landcare Ag program over the past few years, and we've run, I think, 18 workshops around Australia now. Amanda will be able to correct me on that, but that's been in nearly every state and territory. And this has been a bit of an accidental thing where some of our groups reached out and said, we'd like to know more about that desktop biodiversity review that you guys did with us. We did that with 300 odd producers. And we've just run one day, we would call them awareness raising, but Amanda and her team have been able to work with producers and just help them to understand how they can measure, manage and monitor the biodiversity on their farm. And it just to actually get them their language up and their skills up and them comfortable with understanding that actually good primary producers are good for the environment. We love the environment, we look after it, but it's actually really useful to understand some of the ecological language, which is just slightly different words often for the same things we discuss, and how we can, leverage that into what we do every day. A really cool comment that came from Angus Hobson at Monero when Amanda and I did a workshop there that started at 6 in the morning with me lighting a fireplace in a stone 100-year-old shed. It was about -5, I think, wasn't it, Amanda? We did a workshop that day, and Angus Hobson stood up. Someone asked a question on when are these biodiversity markets coming on? When is it going to be financially worthwhile for me to be engaged? That is all very true and very important. But what Angus said, I thought it was such a great comment. He said, you know what? I feel like these markets are going to be the icing on the cake. The actual benefit to all of us here is understanding more about managing our biodiversity and improving our landscape. And if that's all we learn from today, that's great. And if we also get market opportunities and increase our income from it, that's icing on the cake. So I'm not taking away from the economic side of it, but the main thing is to improve our landscape, manage our biodiversity. So look, I'll hand over now to Amanda. Thank you, Dr. Amanda Hansen, and please enjoy, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you, Ange. What an incredibly kind introduction you gave me. I'm not quite as good as Hugh with just speaking without slides, so I am going to run through a little slide deck with you today. And we're going to start by, I guess, setting the scene, which Hugh has done already somewhat, for why biodiversity markets are the topic that we're all talking about right now. And I'm then going to give you a very quick overview of what the Accounting for Nature framework is. As mentioned already, it is quite complex. So towards the end, I'm going to tell you where you can go if you want to learn more about environmental accounting. So the growing interest in nature really comes from the recognition that humans have an integral part to play in nature. So we're highly, highly dependent on the ecosystem services provided by nature, as well as the goods that we can derive from nature. And the concern about biodiversity decline has increased alongside the concern for climate change. So we realize that humans and supply chains and productivity is really hanging on how well we can manage biodiversity. And so from this concern, there's been a lot of global commitments and targets that have been set, both for nations to strive towards, but also at the corporate level, in particular when we talk about larger organizations. There's also an increased public awareness and public concern for nature, which in turn influences the policy and the regulatory drivers. And we see this especially in the EU, where we have a lot of policies in the pipeline that's going to be implemented within the next 2 to 3 years, requiring companies to really understand and report on nature in a standardized way. We're also seeing more and more green finance emerging, and a lot of the green finance is really coming from a risk perspective. So it's acknowledging that managing nature well often leads to less risks. And this is particularly important if you're looking at the property scale. So there's more and more opportunities to help get lower interest rates, potentially low insurance premiums, by showcasing how you are managing nature. And as kind of mentioned, the icing on the cake is nature credits. And so nature credits really fit into corporate disclosures a lot of the time. So companies are aware about their public image when it comes to how they deal with nature, which forces them not only to report on nature, but also showcase what they're doing to mitigate impact, to, as what we're moving towards now, have a positive impact on biodiversity and nature, to be able to showcase that they're actually contributing to the nature positive commitments and goals that we've set internationally. And all of these things really require that we have robust, scientifically accurate ways to measure and report on nature, and that we have verification processes in place to make sure that the data we're putting out there is correct and have been independently verified. And I'm going to introduce you to one acronym now, apologize, and it's the TNFD, which stands for the Task Force on Nature-Related Financial Disclosures. And I wanted to introduce this particularly because it's one of the key drivers behind nature disclosures globally. And what this does, it's telling companies that they now need to start understanding how they interact with nature and what potential risks and opportunities arise from those interactions with nature. And so the largest companies around the world are now grappling and trying to understand where they impact nature across their supply chains, what risks there might be in those interactions, and how to report on those and how to mitigate those. And even if this is happening at the really high corporate level for the large organizations, this is trickling down into the supply chains, because they're going to come to the supply chains and start asking for data that might not be available to them today. And that's really driving an uptake of environmental accounting. So the Accounting for Nature framework is funded on over 15 years of research by the Wentworth Group of concerned scientists. And it was scientists in collaboration with industry that developed a tool that could be applied across various scales. So from small project scale up to the larger NRM scale, on how we can measure and report on nature in a standardized way, which is really complex, noting how diverse nature is. About 5-6 years ago, they turned that research into the Accounting for Nature framework, which today is a non-for-profit organization that kind of operationalizes their research. What we do is provide standardized ways to measure and report on nature and options to have that third party verified. And we also really work on transparency to make sure that the data that's being measured and reported is publicly available for people to go in and query. And our mission is really to bring integrity to all of the things I've spoken about. And this is particularly important when we talk about claims. So in Australia and internationally, there's a big crackdown on what claims can be made when it comes to sustainability and nature. We're quite used to being used to use the terms such as green or sustainable, but what does that really mean? So the crackdown that's coming now is requiring companies to have evidence behind claims that they put out to the marketplace. And so in order for us to have trust in markets and claims, we need transparency, we need independence to verify data, we need comparability to understand the data. So we have a metrics called the econ that I'm going to introduce shortly. We need a framework that's user-friendly so that people can adopt it. It's not restricted to the larger corporations. And we need to bring in scientific rigor in how we measure and report on nature. And lots of acronyms. Don't stress too much about them. What we're trying to say here is really that the Accounting for Nature framework fits into a lot of these international frameworks, goals and targets, and reporting standards. A lot of these have really strong ambitions for what we should be concerned about, what we should be reporting on, but they don't provide the specific details for how we actually do this on the ground. So that's where the Accounting for Nature framework comes in, by providing really specific methods that you can apply to measure and report on nature. And we focus on three key things. The first and the primary one is certifying environmental accounts. So we provide pathways and steps to develop environmental accounts. And so they're not developed by us, they're developed by other third parties. But we certify the data to make sure what's being published is accurate and has been carried out in accordance to our standard and to our method. So the next thing we do is accredit scientific monitoring methods. Again, these methods are developed by, can be industry groups, often in collaboration with universities and other scientific bodies. And we have a panel of an independent science committee, and they review all the methods that are being put forth to them to make sure they're scientifically accurate and rigorous. And they're actually meeting today to approve more methods. And we also work to build capacity, so help people understand what environmental accounting is and how it can be adopted for various end purposes. And we train professionals working in the sustainability field on how they can help landholders and others in industry to create environmental accounts. So since 2019, when we were turned into a non-for-profit, we have seen 61 registered environmental accounts. We have certified 22 environmental accounts, and we have accredited 23 methods to monitor and measure environmental condition. And if you're interested to learn more about these, they are all available on our website. We are also working to expand the network of professionals that can help out in this field, and they're called our accredited experts. And so we have about 90 accredited experts on a list at the moment. You can contact them if you want to get help to build an environmental account. We have about 10 accredited auditors, which are people who conduct the audits at the end to make sure that the data is being collected in accordance with the method and in accordance to our standard. So the econ metric I mentioned before is what's called the Environmental Condition Index. It measures the state of nature from a scale of 0 to 100, where 100 represent that the part of the environment that you're measuring is in the best possible condition it can be in. A score of 0, on the other hand, means that the part of the environment you're measuring might be completely missing. So that could be if you're looking for a specific fauna, that fauna might not be there, you would get a score of 0. Or it can be that it's just highly, highly degraded and the function's been lost in the ecosystem. And so the econ can be measured for a range of different parts of the environment. And I'm going to talk more about how we kind of categorize and classify the environment. But the idea is that whatever you're measuring and wherever you're measuring that, you have the same score that you're using to communicate the environmental condition, which means that it's comparable. And this is really important if we're looking to underpin any sort of credit issuance, that we're actually comparing apple to apple. Otherwise, it's going to be really, really hard to navigate the value of biodiversity credits. We also have methods produced in a range of different accuracy levels. So down at the bottom right, you can see we have 80, 90, and 95%. And what that accuracy level alludes to is the confidence we have in that the econ represents the true condition of the environment. So the higher the accuracy level of a method you apply, the more kind of rigorous that environmental monitoring has been, but that often comes with a higher cost as well. So the lower accuracy levels, such as 80%, is often sufficient if you're looking to monitor your land for management purposes. It might be sufficient if you're a part of a supply chain requiring environmental data, but it might not be sufficient if you are seeking to enter environmental markets. But this is all up to the specific environmental market that you're trying to access. We also have an optional metric called the PCOND, which is looking at the productive index. So instead of considering the environmental condition from a degraded state, we're looking at how well situated is the soil or the vegetation at producing the goods that I'm interested in. So for grazing, you could look at the PCOND for pastures. For cropping, you could look at the PCOND of soil, for example. And so some of our methods have this built in as an optional reporting index to help put the econ into a context if you're on productive land. So there's a lot of things that you could potentially measure. And to help kind of navigate between our methods, I just wanted to go quickly how we break the environment down. So we use the realms of land, freshwater, and ocean as the kind of coarsest way to break down the environment. Environmental assets are what sits within realms. So we have 6 asset classes. So we've got fauna, vegetation, soil sediment, microorganisms, ecosystems, and water. And so with our methods, they can be really broad. So we have a lot of methods for vegetation that can be applied all across Australia to generate that econ. We have methods that are really specific. So for fauna, we have a woodland bird method, we have a koala method. It all comes down to that you need to measure and monitor what's important for you and what's important for the end users of the data. That might be external stakeholders. It might be knowing what the market's interested in and willing to pay more for, or it might just be for your internal management purposes. And so we have 23 methods available on our website, and they're all slightly different. So they're developed for specific purposes. They're all developed for a specific environmental asset or a part of an environmental asset class. They all have an accuracy level attached to them. So whatever the accuracy level of the method is accredited at, that will be the accuracy level of the econ that it generates. And they're all for particular scales. So this can be methods that are suitable to the smaller property scale. It can be methods that are suited to large property scales when we're talking, 100, 200,000 hectares. And then lastly, we also have regional methods that are suited for councils or for NRM organizations. And we're always happy to help kind of navigate between our methods, knowing it can be somewhat complex to find the one that's best suited for your purpose. But it's a really important step to make sure that we monitor and report on what's really important for us and our end objectives. And so this is the kind of structure of an environmental account. So down at the bottom, you have your scope and your purpose, and that's really looking at understanding why am I doing an environmental account. You then step up to find methods that align with your purpose. You can pick one method if, for example, what you're interested in is accessing a credit market. They require you to measure vegetation. You could pick a vegetation method and start monitoring that. If you're trying to understand biodiversity on your property more broadly, you might be interested in looking at the soil, vegetation, and fauna condition on your property, meaning you might apply multiple methods. For every method you apply, you generate an asset account. So if you have multiple methods, you will have multiple asset account, and they will all have their own econ score. And all of that sits under your environmental account. So it's really kind of the umbrella terminology that captures all of these stages. We have a 5-step process for how to develop an environmental account. I'm not going to go into it in much detail today. We do have lots of resources on our website on what this entails. But importantly, we require that anyone who has an environmental account measure the condition of the environment at least every 5 years and publish reports on that. And this is a snapshot of what an environmental account can look like once it's certified. So this is what we call our certification passport. It produces a quick overview of the environmental accounts and puts it into context. So it talks about the purpose of the environmental account, the method that was applied, and the end result. So what was your econ and how is that trending over time? It also comes with a technical report, and this is a very detailed document talking about the purpose, the context, method applications, calculations behind the econ, limitations of method application, and these are all publicly available on our website. So please go in and look at them if you're interested to learn more about what they look like and what data is being published. We have 2 different certification pathways. AFN verified is oftentimes the cheaper option and is the verification that we carry out of the environmental account. Very suited if you're looking at reporting on management or understanding your management practices. We also have an option to have environmental accounts independently audited, which is required if you're looking at issuing any types of credits or certificates with environmental accounts. If you are looking at accessing sustainability-linked loans, green bonds, make claims surrounding contributions to nature positive, or if you're seeking product labeling. I'm briefly going to touch upon the ways that we kind of intersect with the credit markets, noting we have experts in the room today who will talk in more detail about this. So firstly, Nature Plus, which was developed by Green Collar, and it's a standard to issue biodiversity credits. So Accounting for Nature was the chosen framework for the monitoring, reporting, and verification of credit issuance. And Green Collar is in the stage of transitioning this standard to Accounting for Nature. So in early 2025, we will take over the management of that standard, and then we will eventually transition that to an independent body to make sure that product developers, monitoring and verification, and credit issuance are all 3 separate entities. We also support voluntary carbon plus markets. And what this means is that if you're generating ACCU through nature-based solutions, you can demonstrate the positive impact these have on the environment and the environmental condition. So by linking environmental accounts to ACCUs, you can showcase that the ACCU isn't just sequestering carbon or removing carbon, it's also led to other biodiversity improvements, which in the end can help gain a price premium on those ACCUs. So we're used by the Land Restoration Fund in Queensland to verify co-benefits of ACCUs delivered through that program. But we are also partnering with Trovio, who is the same organization that the Clean Energy Regulator is using to build up the digital infrastructure that will support ACCU issuances. So the idea is that you will be able to use blockchain to link the econ from an environmental account to an ACCU, and that is traceable, which will help support integrity of the market of co-benefits. So the rules of these are currently undergoing consultation. And we also used to help other environmental markets. So there's multiple biodiversity markets being developed in Australia and internationally. And so there's a lot more to come within the next 12 to 24 months on this. And we are working really closely with the Australian government to understand how we fit into the nature repair market, because we see a really clear alignment between our frameworks and our methodologies and all the rules that are currently out for, or have been out for consultation by the nature repair market. So if you're interested in learning more, we have an online training course in environmental accounting that contains pretty extensive free preview. So please jump on that training course in the free preview if you want to learn more about environmental accounting. And with that, I'll hand back over to Ange. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Amanda. Once again, a great presentation. And please keep in touch with the Landcare Ag, because over the next couple of years, we're going to be working closely with both Accounting for Nature and Farming for the Future and other organisations to support capacity, capability and confidence building around biodiversity in agriculture. So without further ado, I'm going to hand you over to another esteemed speaker, Catherine Reardon from DQ. And Catherine's going to discuss the biodiversity market once again, and the ability for the market, I guess, to encourage investment in biodiversity broadly. So Catherine, handing over to you, and thank you so much, Amanda.
Thank you very much, Angela. And wow, 2 hard acts to follow. Thank you, Hugh and Amanda. I'll just pop up some slides for you. And if you could let me know when they come through. Oh, good. Thank you. Excellent. Great. Well, thank you. I'm Catherine Reardon here from the Nature Repair Committee team in the Nature Finance and Markets Division of DQ, the Federal Department of Climate Change, Energy, Environment and Water. I'm here to talk about the nature repair market. I'd like to start my presentation by associating myself with Ange's acknowledgement of country, and I'd like to say that I'm speaking to you today from Ngunnawal country, and to thank the traditional owners and custodians of this area for their care for country over many thousands of years, to acknowledge their elders past and present, and to pay my respects to any First Nations people here today. So what is the nature repair market? My presentation is not cooperating right now. There we are. So the nature repair market, great, thank you. Nature repair market is the world's first legislated national voluntary biodiversity market, and it will allow landholders, including First Nations people, to be compensated for repairing and protecting nature on their land. It will allow investors to invest in nature, and within a regulated framework with scientific integrity, and it will allow private investment to contribute to nature repair in Australia. So the objectives of the nature repair market are set out here, and these are the ones set out in the Act, the Nature Repair Act. Broadly, it's intended to promote the enhancement and protection of biodiversity in native species in Australia to help us meet our international obligations, like the Convention on Biodiversity, to contribute to the goal of no new extinctions and promote engagement between market participants, to support and promote the role of First Nations people in caring for country, and to enable the use of First Nations knowledge, guided by the owners of that knowledge, and finally, to support better information on biodiversity across Australia. So many of you might be familiar with this map, which was created by the Institute of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Studies. And it sort of shows the diversity of First Nations language groups across the country. And it aims to depict all those language, social or nation groups and larger groupings of people within a group. So First Nations people will be able to participate in the nature repair market in a number of ways, as landholders and as project owners, or as participants in projects on their own land, or as land management experts contributing to other projects. So they might be employed using their traditional knowledge of caring for country in remote areas, and then utilising their knowledge of country to design biodiversity methods and contribute local ecological knowledge. And the Nature Repair Act protects the interests of First Nations people in several ways. Firstly, through protection of their cultural knowledge, and secondly, through requiring native title holders to give consent before a project's registered, and again, before project activities can begin. Who can participate in the nature repair market? All landholders in Australia, including First Nations people. And projects can be on land, on inland waters like lakes and rivers, and in marine and coastal environments out to the 12 nautical mile mark, also in Australia's external territories. The Nature Repair Act doesn't set out a maximum or minimum area for a project to take place on, but individual methods may set those areas in relation to particular habitat types or particular activities. And some methods will require that a project plan be submitted together when a project is registered with the Clean Energy Regulator. So looking to how the nature repair market will work, at the heart of the nature repair market are biodiversity projects. So they're projects designed to enhance or protect biodiversity in native species. And an individual landholder or a project developer with the consent of the landholder will come to the Clean Energy Regulator and seek to register a project. That project will have to be consistent with an approved biodiversity method, approved under the Nature Repair Act. And if the landholder or project developer meets the criteria set out in the legislation and the regulations, the project will be registered by the Clean Energy Regulator. Biodiversity methods will apply to a particular type of project, and they'll set out requirements for managing, reporting, assessing and monitoring biodiversity and project activities that must be carried out, as well as some activities which must not be carried out. They may incorporate other documents which will give greater detail about those, and the Minister will approve methods on the advice of the Nature Repair Committee. Once a project's been carried out and a landholder has or project developers carried out those project activities and they've seen a biodiversity gain or a biodiversity gain is likely, they come back to the Clean Energy Regulator and they apply for a certificate to be issued. And that biodiversity certificate, once it's issued, will be tradable personal property, so it will be able to be bought and sold. And there'll be one certificate issued per project, and the project attributes, key project attributes, will be recorded on the certificate and when it's issued by the Clean Energy Regulator. And that will allow buyers to compare projects successfully and to decide what they're interested in investing in nature. Really key feature of the market is that it's intended to be founded on a really firm foundation of integrity and transparency, and that's both sort of legal integrity and scientific integrity. So the legal integrity is the framework comprises a number of things, including the Nature Repair Act 2023, passed by the Parliament last December, the Nature Repair Rules, which are currently in development and which we recently concluded a consultation on, and the Biodiversity Assessment Instrument, which sets out how biodiversity will be measured in the market and will create rules that are consistent between different biodiversity methods. Public registers will hold information about projects and will enable people to track the issue and ownership and transfer of biodiversity certificates. And the owners of biodiversity certificates will be able to make public claims about their investment in nature. And the government will be issuing guidance on how to make those claims accurately and within the law around the time that the market begins. And we've been speaking with other agencies to make sure that we provide the best advice to people. Compliance and assurance mechanisms will ensure that projects deliver as they're expected to, and there are a number of powers that the Clean Energy Regulator has, which includes advice, audits, reporting and notification of people doing projects to ensure that those benefits really are there. And then some of the scientific integrity of the market is assured by the scientific experts we have consulted to, as we've developed the market, and by the Nature Repair Committee, which is an independent statutory committee appointed by the Minister. And that committee has experts in a number of different fields and provides advice on every method and on every biodiversity assessment instrument made by the Minister for the market. So biodiversity assessment for the nature repair market is set out mainly in a biodiversity assessment instrument, and that will set out requirements for how methods assess and describe biodiversity in a standardised way. And then this consistent information can be used by buyers and others to compare projects made under different methods. And buyers can use this information to judge which aspects of a project are most important to them. Requirements for consistency will be balanced by ensuring that projects are tailored to the biodiversity in that area and the type of management that that area needs and the monitoring needed to demonstrate change. And then methods will embed and interpret the biodiversity assessment instrument. So someone developing a project will only have to focus on meeting the requirements of the relevant method. The biodiversity assessment instrument and methods and projects will need to be supported by different forms of knowledge, and the knowledge needs to be accessible, verifiable, trusted, and to improve over time. And then to assist this, the department's partnering with the CSIRO on an ecological knowledge system to support methods and projects and make local environmental information more accessible. There's also a co-design project underway for the appropriate interaction of Indigenous knowledge and values with the ecological knowledge system. So we consulted recently on a proposed biodiversity assessment instrument for the market, and that consultation closed last week. So there are many people in the department busy reading many submissions at this stage. And yeah, the BAI, as I said, sets out how methods assess and describe biodiversity in a standardised way. And the key aspects of the BAI will be appropriately incorporating First Nations knowledge, values and data consistently with the objects of the Act, introducing standard approaches for assessing and describing biodiversity, and setting out general requirements for consistency and transparency. Biodiversity methods will be similar in concept to those in the carbon market. And there's quite a lot to resolve about how we do methods, about how they're prioritised and how we approach them to ensure that they're consistent, but also drawing on relevant local knowledge. We have a pipeline of methods that are in development at the moment, and those include enhancing remnant vegetation, a native forest method, invasive pest management, and a permanent protection method, and a rangelands method. The first method for the nature repair market was consulted on also recently, and it's drawn from the experience of carbon plus biodiversity methods, but it's called the Replanting Native Forest and Woodlands Ecosystems method. So in a method, as I mentioned before, be conditions for registering a project, conditions for issuing a certificate, activities to be carried out or not to be carried out, project monitoring and reporting and notification requirements, and how activity and permanence periods will be worked out. So this Replanting Native Forest and Woodland Ecosystems method is the first in that pipeline of methods, and it'll support the replanting of native forest and woodland ecosystems on cleared land in Australia's intensive use landscapes. These areas contain high concentrations of threatened species and ecological communities, which makes them a priority for nature repair. And the method focuses on the reforestation of cleared areas rather than the enhancement of existing native forest and woodlands. As I'll talk a little bit further about in a minute, the method was informed by the Carbon Plus Biodiversity pilot delivered under the Australian Government's Agriculture Biodiversity Stewardship Package. And it has been designed to enable project stacking with projects registered under the Environmental Plantings ACU scheme. And it's involved engagement and consultation with a range of experts and stakeholders. So we've been running 2 pilots over the last few years to inform approaches for the nature repair market. The Carbon Plus Biodiversity and Enhancing Remnant Vegetation pilots, and both were designed in partnership with the Australian National University. And then also in consultation with natural resource management organisations. And there are multiple benefits for landholders participating in the scheme, including diversifying income from their property, improving productivity through shelter belts and other plantings, and contributing to the resilience of their landscapes. So the C+B pilot just tested that concept of buying and selling carbon and biodiversity together. And they required landholders to plant a biodiverse mix of species to sequester carbon while improving biodiversity on their land. The C+B program was slightly more challenging for landholders to be involved in because it involved enrolling in a carbon market project as well as carrying out activities for the biodiversity project. And that was piloted in a number of regions across Australia, from Tasmania to Queensland and southwest Western Australia. And we have 52 active projects still on the go at the moment. The Enhancing Remnant Vegetation pilot tests approaches to paying landholders to manage native vegetation using locally adapted management protocols. And successful landholders received payments to manage and improve existing remnant native vegetation on their properties. They had to actively manage those project areas in exchange for payments annually over 10 years. And so those pilot regions were again from Tasmania to southwest Western Australia, the Eyre Peninsula in South Australia, north central Victoria, central west New South Wales, and the Burnett Mary region in Queensland. And we currently still have 81 active projects at the moment. So those projects were really useful in helping us to test these approaches, and they have been monitored closely both as the methods were developed and as the projects have been underway. And I think I've spoken to some of the landholders who really enjoy being involved in this process. We also have another tool which is being used at the moment called the Planner platform, planr.gov.au. This website is it's up and running, but it's being improved all the time. And this enables people to plan plantings projects and to estimate the costs and returns. The costs of each project will vary based on project-specific characteristics. And so this is another tool which will support the market. It also has a marketplace function within it, which will enable potential project buyers and potential project developers to communicate with each other. And we're also, in addition to setting up this platform, the government's developing standard form contracts to allow landholders beginning projects to make a contract with someone who will ultimately buy a nature repair certificate. Just to give you a bit of an overview of environmental markets in Australia, to let you know that you're already familiar with the carbon market, everyone will have heard of the water market, and you'd be aware that there are private voluntary biodiversity schemes, there are state-based compliance biodiversity schemes, and then there are private voluntary water quality schemes. But the nature repair market will occupy a different spot in the middle of the umbrella, which is it's a government-backed market, a legislated market that's national and deals with biodiversity. And underneath the umbrella at the bottom there, you'll see all of the other parts of the picture which are required to make the market work, which will include project developers, environmental accounts, brokers and traders, ecologists, and seed and tube stock suppliers. So just taking you through the process and where we're at now with the nature repair market. So the Nature Repair Act was passed in December 2023, and then the Nature Repair Committee was established at the end of July 2024. We've been doing, as a department, we've been consulting on rules and instruments and holding workshops about methods all this year and late last year. And recently we did formal consultation on the first method and biodiversity assessment instrument for the market. The next step in the yellow circle there will be for the Nature Repair Committee to consider the first method and the biodiversity assessment instrument, to look at the feedback and under the legislation to advise the Minister on their view about both of those. And then we anticipate that the scheme will open for applications early next year. So thank you for your patience and listening. And this here is the address for the nature repair market. Please get in touch if you would like further information or you'd like to be added to our mailing list to be kept in touch with what's going on with the market. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that great session, Catherine. We really appreciate it, and we're very lucky in our industry to have people like you and your organisation practically kind of evolving this as it's moving across the industry for us all. So thank you so much, and we will share your mailing list and those links with the group after this as well. So thank you. And I just want to apologise, and thanks, Catherine, for picking up on that. I didn't do an acknowledgement to country. People who know me know that's very dear to my heart, and I really apologise. So I'd just like to acknowledge the country on where we're all separately sitting. I'm back on Kamilaroi country, which is where I was born and where I grew up, and I'm really happy to be back on it. So I'd like to acknowledge leaders past, present and future, First Nations leaders, and thank you and apologies for this coming in so late. So our next speaker on our esteemed bunch of speakers is the other Viking on our speaking team. So that's Björn. He is with Green Collar, and Björn brings 18 years of experience leading high impact initiatives across conservation and nature-based solutions in Australia. He's currently the head of nature at Green Collar, where his role focuses on the development of voluntary biodiversity credit markets in Australia and overseas. So Björn's going to share information on current and developing biodiversity markets and how to participate in them. And hopefully by the end of this event, I will have the pronunciation of your name right, Björn. Over to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ange. I'm just going to share my slides, so hopefully everyone can see that. Right. So yeah, my role focuses almost entirely on the development and growth of Nature Plus, which Amanda alluded to earlier, which builds upon the Accounting for Nature framework and sits as a private sector offering to the biodiversity credit market in Australia and also overseas. Just a bit about Green Collar. So we were founded in 2011. We've grown to become one of Australia's largest and most diversified environmental markets companies. We basically exist to value nature and to put nature on the balance sheet. We've got an existing portfolio of 200 plus registered and contracted projects spanning over 5 million hectares. We've got a forecasted abatement of approximately 100 million Australian carbon credit units, 60,000 plus nature plus units, which I'll be talking about soon, as well as reef credits and the first tranche of Australia's first plastic credits. So we're really actively diversifying into different areas of the environmental markets. But focusing and doing a deep dive on Nature Plus, it's a voluntary biodiversity credit scheme helping to drive investment into global conservation outcomes. And just to situate it in the landscape of environmental markets, so Hugh mentioned earlier that we have an active and working biodiversity offsets market in Australia. That's very much where a developer removes or destroys a habitat in one area and needs to compensate for that in another area. Then you've got carbon plus co-benefits or core benefits, or what some might call premium carbon, where you've got nature-based carbon solutions that identify the presence or absence of biodiversity or are set up specifically as well to increase biodiversity. They support the maintenance of biodiversity, but they're limited to areas where carbon methods can go and don't stand as separate standalone biodiversity credit units. Then you've got the nature positive or the net positive standalone voluntary biodiversity credit. And that's where Nature Plus comes in. It's not an offset. It's purely voluntary, and it's designed to create a measurable uplift in biodiversity across an area over time. It's specifically designed to support companies within their supply chains. So for farmers, for example, working on agricultural land that supply milk or beef to a buyer, where the buyer has an identified target to invest back into nature or wants to use a way of investing into nature as part of their claims of in their products. I'll go into that a bit more detail soon. In terms of how it works, so in a real nutshell, it works with accounting for nature's environmental conditions score. So when you have when you start the project, you start with an assessment of the environmental asset or the project area, and you get a base score, a starting conditions score. Say, for example, that's 30. Then you work with us or with a developer to create an environmental intervention or environmental management plan. You then execute that, and then over time, and then you reassess a year or 2 years down the track, depending on the method, and you get a new score. And hopefully that score is increased. So say, for example, your starting score was 30, and then you had a score of 35. You would get the difference, the 5 points, those would be your credits, and you get 5 credits per hectare. What's quite unique to the Nature Plus standard is that it's also got something called a conservation threshold, and that's established at the start of the project. And that's the threshold at which the project enters into a conservation state. So the regeneration has occurred. Say, for example, that's an environmental conditions score of 70. You then get credited every year. So it incentivizes long-term investment into the landscape. You get credited every year that you maintain that score above 70. So say, for example, you maintained the environmental condition of your land at a score, environmental condition score of 75, you'd get 5 credits per year or per monitoring period. The Nature Plus credits are valued based on different tiers. So Tier 1 is if the project area contains biodiversity of international significance within a key biodiversity area. Tier 2 is of national significance, for example, areas threatened or species threatened under the EPBC Act. And the third would be state or local based significance. And they're used to help price the credits in the market. So we're very excited to announce Amanda touched on this earlier, that we are actually handing over the ownership and the rights to Nature Plus in its entirety to Accounting for Nature. That was announced last month. Green Collar spent 5 years developing Accounting for Nature, and is conducted in close partnership with Accounting for Nature. We've conducted a pilot program where we brought 20 projects through the piloting phase, 2 of which are now crediting. We have over 60,000 credits ready for sale, which we've been actively going out to the market with. It's a really important step for the maturity of the scheme, because basically what we want to do with this is open it up for competition. So now Green Collar steps back, we're going to hand over the registry, and developers can basically use this as an off-the-shelf scheme to develop private sector-based biodiversity credits. And Green Collar steps back and just becomes one developer, hopefully amongst many. The potential for Nature Plus is really quite broad and limitless, in that it's designed to work across a broad spectrum of ecosystems. It can be used very successfully in the productive sector, in agricultural contexts, but it can also be used very specifically to monitor for biodiversity uplift with specific populations and species such as koala or the swift parrot. We're currently working with Indigenous groups to integrate it into their land management practices, and it can even be used in greenfield tourism or housing developments, depending on the method. In terms of how we're engaging with Landcare and NRMs, we really need to state, like, this is the very early stages of the market. The way we're approaching it now is we are working with opportunities where the producer and the buyer are closely linked, and where we can secure an offtake or an initial agreement to buy credits alongside the development of the project is actually baked into our feasibility assessment of a project. So for example, if you're a wool grower and you have a strong connection to the buyer of the wool in Italy or in Australia, we would bring everyone to the table, design the project from the ground up, and then look to secure early stage demand whilst we develop the method and the biodiversity project itself. Just a bit about the market, because we've been actively, for the last 6 months, we've been talking to every major corporation that we can in Australia. At a high level, we've just come back from COP16, which is the UN Global Biodiversity Conference in Colombia, and there's real energy behind this. Large Fortune 500 companies. Amanda mentioned, that they're adopting the Task Force for Nature-related Disclosure, science-based targets for nature. There's a lot of talk and a lot of energy, and there seems to be a confluence between the work and the energy in the private sector that's been done around climate and around nature. They're now seen as inextricably linked. And there was even talk about, combining the conferences with climate and nature. So we believe it's something that's coming, but it's still in its early days. What we know about demand from being out in the market is that the large corporations, the big end of town, they're still grappling with global frameworks such as Task Force for Nature-related Disclosure and science-based targets to understand what their dependencies are on nature, what their opportunities are, what the risks are. But from that, we've had very clear signals that they will develop internal targets for investment in nature. And that's where we believe the investment will go towards things like Nature Plus standalone biodiversity credits. We've seen some interest from state-based governments, where governments are looking to attract or test the possibility of attracting private sector investment into their conservation estates. In this scenario, a government would basically only pay for a biodiversity uplift when it's occurred, so that it's not like a grant scheme where they would be paying for the activities to occur with the hope that it would create a biodiversity uplift. So it kind of de-risks it. And it also, you know, with a state-based government providing the assurance that it would buy credits, it de-risks it for private sector investment as well. Ironically, the organisations that are not engaged with the Task Force on Nature-related Disclosure and science-based targets we're seeing are the early adopters or the early movers. They're the ones that are not having to go through the complex processes of understanding how they relate to these global frameworks. But their interest is not at scale. It's at a much smaller scale than the much larger corporations. We're also seeing interest from cultural and arts-based organizations that are very taken by the scientific rigor and robustness of the Nature Plus credit scheme, and see this as a way to invest in conservation as they would in a philanthropic context, but to do so in a unitized and more robust way. The types of early stage demand that we're focusing on and that we're seeing, so one we're calling demand-led supply. That's really where an organization, so for example, a supermarket wants to work directly with their farmers that are supplying to them, and they want to have biodiversity projects on their land so that they can make biodiversity-based claims, either on their products or as an organization as a whole. Then there's bundled and stapled biodiversity credits. And this is something that Green Collar is actively pursuing as a pilot. We're most likely going to be doing this next year, where we bundle biodiversity credits and reef credits with Australian carbon credit units that we sell for large compliance buyers. We're also seeing demand, and we're acting on the demand for the demand for iconic projects. So projects that are very closely aligned with iconic species or adjacent to national parks, or run, owned, and managed by well-known Indigenous organisations. And then there's the demand for the off-the-shelf products. So, for example, there are pilot projects that have created a large volume of credits. One of the ways we're exploring to create demand for this is like a per ticket model. For example, a large festival, you buy a ticket, and $1 of every ticket goes towards nature positive impact, which includes a credit. So that's the end of the presentation. Really keen to hear from you if you're a land manager and you do have those links to demand, or if you have a way of structuring a project that can bring demand to the table. But yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Björn, for a great presentation. Certainly a lot to think about there. And for everyone, I will reach out to all of our esteemed speakers, and I'm pretty sure they'll be happy for me to share their contacts after this webinar with you all. So we'll be able to, if you need to get in touch with any of these people, including Björn, as he just mentioned, yeah, we'll be able to get the contacts to you. So thank you. The next speaker is another one of my favourite people. Everyone's my favourite person, but if everyone can see the background behind me at the moment, it's on a beautiful property up at Banana, and our next speaker, Melanie Leather, is the owner and land manager of that property, and we're out there doing some assessments with Accounting for Nature and Mel. This all sort of comes together, doesn't it? And it was a lovely landscape where they had this beautiful dry feed, a great biodiversity of plant species, the soil was looking really healthy. And Amanda has been working, or Accounting for Nature has been working with the Leathers for a few years now, understanding that biodiversity element, and it certainly is having a really good positive impact on Leather Cattle Co. Now, Mel Leather is a fantastic spokesperson for agriculture. Her and her husband, Rob, just won a huge international award recently over in Uruguay, and they were, the award was, I'm just going to read out what it was, a Success Through Collaboration Award at the Global Conference on Sustainable Beef in Punta del Este in Uruguay. So the accolade is awarded to the business that best exemplifies the foundational principles and goals of Global Roundtable for Sustainable Beef and drives collaborative efforts to advance beef sustainability. So very happy to welcome Mel back to another webinar. I'm always getting Mel to speak because she's a primary producer that's really engaged in this part of our industry. So thank you so much, Björn, and welcome, Mel, and hand over to you.
Thank you, Ange. And wow, what a lineup of speakers and information that I've got to follow on from. So I don't know if it's a great thing to be last in line today. But look, it's a great pleasure to be part of this important conversation. So thank you, Ange, and thank you, Landcare, for taking the initiative to bring these great minds together and really look at not only the importance of biodiversity, but how agriculture plays a pivotal role in this space. So I'm a beef cattle producer, so my focus today will be on beef cattle rather than the agriculture in general. But farmers manage over 60% of Australia's land mass, and around 42% of Australia's total area is managed by beef cattle producers. So we are the world's second largest beef exporter. Over 70% of our product is exported overseas, so our importance to providing global food security should not be underestimated. Red meat is one of the most nutritious protein sources available to us, and as producers of that superfood, we rely on a healthy ecosystem to provide us with the environment to do this. So our responsibility to look after our environmental systems is enormous, and it's not a job that we take lightly. So why aren't I moving, Ange?
Maybe
there we go. Beautiful. Got it. So today I'm going to talk a little bit about my family business and the work we do to manage our properties. I'm also going to give you my perspective on regeneration and the environmental markets opportunities as I see them. So very much a grassroots perspective. Hugh, Amanda, Jorn, and Catherine have all given us a look through the lens at a very technical side of the biodiversity markets, and mine will be more through very much a farmer lens, so on the ground perspective. I'm also going to talk about practice change and a biodiversity market that we've trialled as a test case for us and the government. And I'm going to then go on to things to consider and things to avoid as I see them. So Leather Cattle Co, it's a family-owned operation. Our son and his wife, Chloe, are partners in the business and live at our Hazeldean property, where they run a full-blood and F1 Wagyu breeding herd. Barfield, where Rob and I live, is predominantly a finishing operation, but we also run some full-blood Wagyu breeders and some Angus cows for the Wagyu F1 market. The 4 Mile is a breeding operation, and it has Brahman and Brahman cross breeders there. All of the properties are EU and grassland accredited. And our marketing strategy is very dependent on seasonal conditions, and we ensure that we have the flexibility to trade, sell feeders, finish cattle, live export. Basically, the seasons and market conditions dictate our selling strategy. So our 3 properties cover about 45,000 acres, and we run around 5,000 head of cattle, depending on the season. So the properties are situated in central Queensland, but they've all got their own environmental nuances. And just to give you some idea how diverse our environment is across the 3 properties we are managing, we've got 30 different regional ecosystems and 14 different land types. So as most of you would appreciate, this takes a very tailored approach, and there's no set and forget for environmental management. It's very much about understanding your environment and managing it accordingly. The one thing we have learnt during our time in business, and that is the importance of collaboration and a continuous path of education. So surrounding yourself with the right people and being willing to try new technology and innovation is what has led our family business to being involved with the many projects that you see listed here. We've found by matching science with production and quantifying what we're doing, we can become agents of change. We've also learnt that there are complementary markets out there that match with our goals to provide a high quality food source with good environmental management. I guess that's really part of the why. So we do it because it's good for the environment. It's good for our animals and it's good for our bank balance. But we also do it because it's the right thing to do. Each and every one of us is responsible for the environment we live in, and each and every one of us must do what we can to improve it. Where do we begin, and who can give us the advice we need? We begin by measuring and truly understanding what our baseline is. We're fortunate in the red meat industry in that we have numerous private, government and tertiary organisations that can help us with that. And the lineup of speakers we've had this morning really highlights, you know, across those whole range of people that are out there with a whole pile of advice and tech that we can use. So thank you to all you guys that are here today. You know, and what are the markets looking for? We've heard today from the previous speakers that there's a lot going on in terms of potential market opportunities. But what if we don't want to participate in these initiatives? Do we still have to consider our role in biodiversity and the state of nature? I would say yes, we do. Being an export-dependent industry, we very much have to meet our global customer requirements. And using the EU deforestation commitment as an example of one of the markets that is looking for nature-related market requirement. And I think, Hugh, you touched on this earlier. Fortunately, they've now extended the start time for this by 12 months. But reality is, if we want to send into the EU, we have to be able to meet their deforestation requirements. Industry is hopefully working hard to make sure this is practical for Australian beef producers. But I think as producers, we need to start to implement measures if this is the market we want to supply to. Our business participated in a pilot with a meat processor supplying the EU as a trial of how we might meet these market demands just recently. So that just shows our processors are definitely on the front foot with this, and we too have to think about how we will choose to manage this market. In terms of biodiversity markets that our business is involved in, I thought I would give you a quick overview of the pilot project we're involved in. The Enhancing Remnant Vegetation pilot is testing ways to pay landholders for improving biodiversity on their properties. And Catherine gave us a very good overview of this earlier, so I won't go over the detail again. So thank you, Catherine. I don't think I could do as good a job as you as explaining that one. We've actually got 2 areas under this pilot on our 4 mile property, and we have signed an agreement for a 10-year period where we are to manage weeds and feral animals in the remnant vegetation areas. We also have grazing and fire management plans that we have agreed to, and in return we get paid to deliver services in pest and weed management, infrastructure development such as fencing and stock water, and we get paid an annual rental agreement. For us, on this particular area, these projects work well in terms of it's giving us funding to take extra care of the delicate ecosystems that exist there. They are dryland rainforest areas and koala habitat, and the money we are receiving is really just covering us to do a service. It's not enhancing our income as such, above what it's costing us to control the weeds and pest animals. And you might ask, is that worthwhile? And I would say yes, because it's allowing us to do work there where the business may not have always been able to afford. And it's definitely worthwhile when we can improve biodiversity of our flora and fauna species. So this work benefits everyone, and I believe everyone should contribute to that. So funding this work is critical for long-term sustainability results and improvements in our biodiversity. I thought I would give you some insight into what we've learned from testing the waters with this biodiversity pilot as well. So some things to consider. And look, first I would say engage experts to do a cost-benefit analysis, preferably someone who can give you good advice backed by science and doesn't have a vested interest in the outcome. Or do this yourself. It's really just about understanding the impact of the project to your business. Yes, it may be generating income, but will it impact on productivity? For us, productivity wasn't impacted at all, but as I said earlier, it gave us an income stream to do pest and weed management, as well as some new infrastructure. So for us, you know, that cost-benefit analysis we saw as a positive outcome. I'd say secondly, understand your ecosystems, land, soil, and vegetation types. What is going to be the best project to suit your systems? It's not always about planting more trees. This particular property grows some of the best native hardwood around, but it's significantly impacted by lantana, which is really damaging to the biodiversity and can create huge fire loads. That's not to say burning is off the table, but we don't want to see the really hot wildfires going through. We want to have the cool burns that are a benefit to some of the flora species. Wild dogs and feral pigs are another huge problem in these delicate systems. Animals like the Crumbat frog are facing extinction from feral pig activity on the stream banks. So control of these pests is critical to stop declining biodiversity. Another thing I would say is collaborate broadly, and I think everyone pretty much has touched on this today. The more people you have in the tent to give you advice and offer perspective, the better. We find the NRM group, staff, the National Wild Dog Coordinator, really beneficial in giving us scientific and technical advice that helps us to make the right decisions on the ground. And Landcare too, of course, Ange. I won't forget you guys. Understand your commitment to do the work on the ground. If that's something, if you're going to do it, you've really got to get in there and get that work done. Reporting for this particular project is made fairly simple through a portal where you can go in and enter details and data that's required, as well as upload photos and other evidence such as invoices. So measure, monitor and record. We can't find solutions if we don't know what our starting point is or how our progress is going. And probably things to avoid, I would say, agreeing to signing long-term deals without thorough analysis. Remember, ask advice, do cost-benefit analysis. Just in general, you need to do your homework before you agree to anything. I think some of the other speakers have touched on it today. A lot of these are very long-term commitments, anything up to 30 years. So, it's not just affecting you, it's the next generation coming along. So something that really has to be thoroughly looked at. And lastly, I would say compromising productivity for environmental outcomes. Find the balance. We have to find the balance for this. Food security is vital for our population to survive, but so is looking after our biodiversity. I think we can do both. We just need to work and look for the solutions. And I think that's pretty much me. Thank you, Ange. I think we're going to go to questions.
Thank you so much, Mel. Always interesting, always inspiring. And just thank you all. It's been such a fascinating session, and I feel like all of us need to get together after this and design our next step, because I know each one of you could speak for a good hour about each of your topics, and a couple of days of working around these would be great. So everyone on this, keep posted, because maybe we need to take that next step next year and work out what that looks like for everyone. So thank you so much. We've had some terrific questions coming in. Thank you so much for that. And so what I will do now, we've had Kelly Penfold in the background working hard to summarise the questions. A lot of these have been answered sort of in the talks and also online with some typing happening. So I'm just going to go straight to Kel's list. And the first question I will ask, sorry, I just have to keep checking. Oh, thank you so much for your positive comments, everyone. First question I've got, and I will open this to our panelists to decide which one of you guys is best placed to answer it. The question was, I already look after the biodiversity on my land. How do I also make financial benefit from this via the product which leaves my farm? So who would like to address that one? Everyone's gone silent. Is that a tough question? I can't answer it.
Okay.
So yeah, it's a really good question, and I think the answer is going to depend on what stage of the market we're at with biodiversity credits. We're at the very early stage of the biodiversity credit market. In this case, the way to generate profit from taking care of biodiversity on the farm with the kind of credit scheme and mechanism that we've developed is actually to bring the buyer and the farmer together and use a Nature Plus or a crediting scheme to measure and quantify the uplift and get the buyer to agree and come on the journey with you to agree to buy those credits once they're produced. They're currently creating a whole bunch of biodiversity credits and putting them on the registry and hoping that they will be bought. Doesn't reflect where the market's currently at. It's a very active sales process that requires knocking on doors and having workshops with buyers and the demand side. That's the way we're approaching it at the moment.
Great. Thank you so much for that answer, Björn. It's such a big thing, isn't it? We could spend hours answering all of these questions quite broadly. So thank you for that. The second question I have here is a kind of sounds like a simple one, but it's not. It is what biodiversity protocols do alternative energy projects have to work with or to meet? You?
I can quickly answer that. I mean, all the renewable energy projects, in theory, are like any other development, like whether it's a mine or a housing development, they should be meeting all the biodiversity regulations of the state or the federal government, which means what we often forget is, first of all, they should try and do those developments to avoid any impact on biodiversity and site them in places with very little biodiversity. Secondly, they should minimise their impacts. They should restore on site. And finally, as a last resort, they offset. Now, we've had some interesting, offsetting, we know, unfortunately, has not been particularly successful activity around Australia over the last 20 years, but we're hoping to get it better. But that's it. They're no different from any other development.
Thank you very much, Hugh, for that answer. Now, we have so many excellent questions coming in. The next one, I might get you to answer a couple, Catherine. I've already identified a couple of questions here. So we've got two. Is it right biodiversity certificates are issued to people, business entities undertaking actions, not the land? This is from Kylie. And there is another one that is, will state governments all adopt this framework, which is from Abigail. So are you happy to jump in, Catherine?
Absolutely. So, the project obviously sits on the land, and once a landholder's made a commitment to a project, it will stay there for that permanence period, which could be 25 years or 100 years under the Act, or a method might set a different permanence period. But the certificate will be issued to the project owner, which could be the landholder, but doesn't have to be. And then the owner of the certificate can sell it to a different person. So even if title in the land changes hands, and as long as the project requirements are being kept up, the certificate will stay with the certificate owner, and they'll continue to have that investment in nature. I'm sorry, Ange, could you just repeat the second question for me? Sorry, you're on mute.
A lot of people could wish that was the reality in every day. Catherine, will state governments all adopt this framework?
We are talking to state governments about this, and as everyone knows, some already have conservation schemes already in place, and others do not yet have them. So we're talking all the time, and comparing frameworks. I think what we'll probably end up with is greater choices for landowners to make about which scheme is the best fit for them. But definitely we're in conversation with them all the time.
Great, Catherine. Thank you very much. I've got another question for you, Catherine. I'm going to send it to you, though, and get you to have a look whilst I throw another question at you. Have a think. It's a very important and very good question. But one question, which is a very good one in the space of actually us looking after the primary producer, is what sort of support, this is for any of our panellists, I'll let you decide who should speak to this one, what sort of support is available to family businesses looking to enter this space? So I know Mel's got some practical experience, and then Amanda, Björn, and all of the panellists could have the other side of that coin. So who'd like to jump in to start the answer to that question? What support's available to family businesses looking to enter this space?
I can kind of start. I think the first step, which is really, really important, is to start by educating yourself on the options and finding trusted sources of truth who don't necessarily have a vested interest in the outcomes of your project that Melanie spoke about. There's lots and lots of people operating in the space that are really happy to help you kind of navigate the best opportunities for you. And with the kind of establishment of the nature repair market, there will be resources available as well to help you guide and understand if that option is the right one for you. If you're looking at credits, you can also reach out to potential project developers that are helping you develop these kind of projects. If you're a part of supply chain, contact people within your supply chain to see if there are opportunities within there. They can be both through them having an interest in making claims about sustainability within the supply chain. I know we're working with several supply chains at the moment who are looking to create niche products where things like environmental accounting will be important to kind of support the green claims that come alongside those specific products. Reach out to your local Landcare network or to Landcare Australia as well. Or your local NRM organisation as well. Yeah, start connecting with people and having the discussion.
Thanks, Amanda. Start connecting to people is a great line takeaway from that one, isn't it? Does anyone else on our panel want to add anything to Amanda's excellent?
No, Amanda covered everyone. Well done, Amanda. Maybe the only other one is that producer group, and that, you know, peer-to-peer learning and getting information from your neighbour. There's nothing more valuable than that either. But certainly Amanda very concisely covered everyone. Thanks, Amanda.
She's awesome, isn't she, Mel?
Yeah.
Hugh Possing. Hugh's going to say something.
I'll
Yes,
say
Hugh?
something more controversial, but probably inaccurate. But I mean, there was a day when state governments used to have extension officers for many activities, and I know they've dwindled away. Primary industries used to have them, and of course, really, in a perfect world, between the Ag Department, Environment Department, they would be funding on-ground people in communities, providing this advice, because the complexities of the issues are high. And I recently, a year and a half ago, finished a huge review of land clearing in Queensland, and we proposed a wide variety of mechanisms. It's all up online on the Chief Scientist website. One of the main things we said is we just need more extension officers out there in the regions, on the land, in the pubs, in the tennis clubs, talking to landowners about all their options, because most landowners we spoke to said there's so many options, we don't want to do anything now, and Melanie sort of because we don't know what might happen in the future. Things are moving too fast. If you just settled and this was stable and, like, you know, then it would be easier for us to engage. So some people are leaping in, and I think they're brave, and I think that's wonderful, and I think they're the first movers, but a lot of the rest will want to see more stability in the rules, the regulations and the markets before they jump in. So and I wish state governments were providing that sort of support if they were serious about supporting rural industries.
I'd agree with you there, Ange. The only other thing is, like, our business approach is to try, if you want to test the waters, engage in pilots and you know, projects where it's not a full commitment, but it gives you an opportunity to at least trial things.
I totally agree so much with Mel and Hugh both, and that's where the work we've done with Mel has been so great. And we love the word pilot, don't we, Mel? Oh, I think all of us on this like that, because that's a way of testing. We're at the forefront. All of the people on this webinar presumably are kind of what we would call early adopters, you know, as in we're wanting to adopt, you're wanting to learn more, and we need to be able to support producers to be able to do that. And Hugh, when I was at the AFI roundtable in Canberra last week, all of you would have been happy to hear that I actually asked a question pretty much about what Hugh spoke about. Where is the support for our Landcare facilitators, our key influencers, our DPI staff, our ag staff, our consultants, to actually keep upskilling? Because we need to keep learning these things, and we need to keep taking the info to producers. But state departments have dropped the bundle a bit, and they're not supporting our extension and adoption network. I actually asked that question. It was the only question of the day that got a round of applause. So the thing is that everyone is concerned about this and invested in a positive outcome. So just for anyone on here, we are working really hard to solve that. But yes, it is an issue. And something that Landcare Ag is working really hard to help. And we've worked with Accounting for Nature, for example, in upskilling some of our facilitators. And we're pretty agnostic. They don't have to be Landcare only. Obviously, Landcare, but NRM groups and everything, just to help people keep ahead of the curve, both producers and their consultants and facilitators. So thank you for those great answers. And I'll stop waffling now. I was going to ask Catherine. She's got a great question there to answer. So shall I just hand that to you, Catherine, and you read the question and the answer, or would you like me to read out the question for you?
If you could read the question, because I've lost it up there in the chat. There's so much going on in there.
I know, there's a lot going on in there. Kel, what was that question? Oh, sorry, no, I've got it here. For Catherine, what is being put into place to protect the NTH traditional knowledge, intellectual property, and what is the process to engage with the NTH? Will the knowledge be recognised and valued? There has been no engagement or consultation to date to our knowledge. That's a question from Brodie.
Thanks very much, Ange, and thank you to Brodie for the question. We have conducted consultations and workshops with First Nations organisations as we've developed the nature repair market, and I'm really sorry if your organisation or organisations you know haven't been a part of that. Please get in touch and let us know. And we're going to continue to do so in future. The ecological knowledge system for the market will be conducting conversations going forward with First Nations people and groups about how First Nations knowledge could be recognised in the market. And the really critical thing to know about that is that the Act specifies that this must be done guided by the owners of that knowledge. And so the free, prior and informed consent of First Nations people will be key to any inclusion of traditional knowledge in the market. So I hope that answers your question. I suppose I'd just like to follow on from what Ange was saying before about people here being the early leaders. I suppose I want to say Australia's leading the world in this. In fact, a number of speakers at the Global Nature Positive Summit that was on in Sydney early last month also recognised this, that Australia's carrying the torch. No other country yet has a national biodiversity market being contemplated like ours. Farmers and landholders of all kinds in Australia are kind of leading the way for the world. So, you know, in a way, we're the pilot. But yeah, we do also love a pilot within the department. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Catherine. I think I've got another question for you, Catherine, only because it says for Catherine on my list of priorities. How does the DQ assessment instrument differ from the Nature Plus environmental accounting? Can there be mutual recognition to reduce duplication?
And that one I cannot give you a great answer to because I'm not an environmental scientist, so I couldn't do a comparison of how the two match up against each other. I just know that our instrument's being made under the requirements of our legislation, but that we anticipate that as the market gets going, you know, there'll be room for innovation across the market. I kind of couldn't say much more than that at the moment, but just as I said, I'm the wrong person to compare the two instruments.
And I'm sorry, Amanda, have you got anything to add to that? Or is that something we can actually, because we can seek answers for some of these questions to provide later. But Amanda.
Yeah, no, sure. I can provide, I guess, a little bit more insight. So it's unlikely that you can do both a certificate and issue credits for biodiversity under both schemes at the same time, because you would basically be duplicating the credit issuance or the certificate issuance if you're measuring the same outcome. However, at least from our understanding at the moment, is that it's very likely that you could use the same or very similar kind of measuring and monitoring approaches as well as activity implementation, and then decide which option is best for you, if that's going into the voluntary kind of credit market or if it's looking at issuing certificates under the nature repair market. So there'll be alignment between the two of them, but you can't necessarily double dip in both schemes at the same time if you are measuring the same thing.
Thank you.
Sorry, Ange, I'd agree with that. Yes, we definitely you can't receive a benefit for doing the same thing from two different sources, and that's part of our interoperability with the ACCU market. Will also be that if you're doing an ACCU project and a nature repair market project on the same land, there'll need to be separate activities and an additional biodiversity gain that you wouldn't have expected to see just from the ACCU project.
Thank you so much, Catherine and Amanda. We're getting lots of great comments coming into our conversation here. And as I said before, we're going to collate them and they will be coming back out to you all just in an email after this, over the next week, with the link to the recording. And also, for example, one of our great Landcare people, Rowan, he's just put up, there's a list of accredited advisors, for example, in Queensland. We will supply any of these relevant things to us, and I'll work with all of these great panelists just to see if there's any other links we should and could include, because, you know, this is a sort of a working group, isn't it? We just need feedback from you guys about what you do need. Kel, is there any key questions that I've missed, or do you think we're getting close to wrapping up and then investigating further with the typed response?
The only thing was a couple of quick questions from people about support and where do they go for help in their community. So I'd suggest that they either send Ange their email address and we can perhaps head them in the right direction.
Great, Kel. And I was going to touch on that. Yes, my email, I've already put my email in the scheme, but the email we send out with everything, the links from this will have my email address and my phone number. So please reach out. The Landcare Ag program for the next few years, we've been tasked with actually kind of working in this biodiversity space and increasing the capacity for our influencers and our producers to engage in these markets. And we'll have the opportunity for more pilots, for groups of producers to actually start working in this biodiversity space. So when this comes out, we will share the expression of interest documents with everyone that's on this call, for example, and with our broader Landcare network, which, as I said, we're agnostic. We obviously work with Landcare, all the different local and state Landcare groups, but we're not restricted only to them. We work with the NRMs and the CMAs and all of the other groups around Australia, because it's the land that we're focused on managing, and also with upskilling our key influencers, which we've already been doing some work in, and we're keen to do more, get them upskilled with sort of accreditation schemes. So unless there's something else pressing that I've missed, I might wrap this up, but my team here, we're going to be pulling this all together and sending out the responses and the links to the webinar. And they'll arrive to you guys within the week. I've just got to head off. We've got an Australian Beef Sustainability Framework meeting up in Brisbane this afternoon, which is 500 k's away from me. So I'll be up to that tomorrow, and up in Mount Isa the day after to look at some biodiversity opportunities up there on a property. So it's all happening in this world. We're keen to support you, and we will support you and your key influencers. So we hope you can keep the channels of communication open with all of us, and please get in contact with me. You've got all my contacts. And look, thank you so much to all of our panelists. You guys are just incredible. You've got the most incredible body of knowledge between you all, and we really appreciate your time. I know that as Landcare, because we're a non-for-profit, I come to all of you busy guys all of the time. You donate your time for free. You're always engaging. You always get on. You provide incredible information for us all. So really, thank you so much. And I feel really comfortable that we've got big challenges ahead of us, but the agricultural industries are always quick to step up to the mark, and we need to be able to do what we do and have positive impacts on the environment. We're learning as we go along. And so thank you all. Thank you for getting on. Please get in touch, and but biggest appreciation out to all of my panelists. Thank you so much for your support. Thank you, everyone, and have a great afternoon, and we'll be in touch.